All right, let's open up a cold case file. This one is pretty strange. It's officially logged as an unexplained sensory and temporal phenomenon. Now, the witnesses? Three very sharp, very observant Royal Navy cadets. The location? Just a quiet little English village. But the incident itself? Well, it was anything but routine. Let's dig into the evidence.
So get this. On a perfectly normal Sunday morning in October of 1957, three guys, William Lang, Michael Crowley, and Ray Baker, were out on a training exercise in Suffolk, England. But what they were about to experience as they walked down into the village of Kersey, well, it would defy any and all simple explanations for decades to come.
Okay, so in any investigation, you know the first thing you do is establish the basic facts. What did the witnesses report? So we're going to start with their initial observations and this profound environmental weirdness they ran into the second they entered the village of Kersey.
So here's the top sheet of the file. We've got three highly credible witnesses. These are Royal Navy cadets, right? They're trained to observe. The date is October 1957. The place is Kersey, a tiny village in Suffolk, and the incident classification. That's really what makes this case so fascinating, an unexplained sensory and temporal phenomenon.
From up on a hillside, the cadets saw exactly what you'd expect, a typical autumn scene. You know, red and brown leaves, you could hear birds, even the ringing of church bells. A perfectly normal Sunday. But then, as they walked down into the village, it was like reality itself just warped. The autumn colors, gone, replaced by this lush summer green. All the sounds of life just vanished into this heavy, oppressive silence. And the whole atmosphere just shifted to this feeling of deep sadness and dread, a weight they said they could literally feel.
All right, Section 2, Physical Evidence. This is where we catalog every single anomaly they observed. This is the point where the report goes from just a weird feeling to a list of concrete, absolutely inexplicable facts.
The cadets started documenting a scene that just flat out shouldn't have existed in 1957. The houses looked medieval, but people were clearly living in them. There were no power lines, no telephone poles, no TV antennas, none of the basic infrastructure you'd see in the mid-20th century. And it gets even weirder. Smoke coming from the chimneys was rising in these perfectly still, unmoving columns. And the trees themselves cast no shadows. Every single thing they saw just added to this deep, deep sense of unreality.
You know, William Lang's description of the silence really nails it. He said it wasn't just quiet or peaceful, he described the air as dead, like sound itself was broken. It couldn't travel right. This wasn't just a lack of noise, it was some kind of unnatural void.
So their path led them to what looked like a butcher shop, and what they found inside was just deeply unsettling. Zero modern equipment. Instead, hanging from hooks were three oxen carcasses. And remember, oxen were work animals, not something you typically see butchered for meat in 1957. The flesh was just green with decay, dripping this sticky fluid all over the floor. It was a scene of just profound rot.
Now, think about this for a second. Rotting meat outdoors in what was probably pretty mild weather. It should have been swarming with flies, maggots, the normal signs of decay. But the cadets reported seeing zero insects, not one. That single detail is biologically impossible under normal conditions, and it just highlights how profoundly unnatural this whole scene was.
But the biggest piece of physical evidence was the church. From the hill, the cadets heard bells ringing from a church with a finished tower. But once they were actually in the village, that tower was gone. The building they were looking at looked half-finished, like someone had just stopped building it centuries ago. This wasn't a feeling. This was a massive, missing piece of the landscape. For decades, this whole thing was just an unexplained, bizarre story. But the case was unofficially reopened in the late 1980s. So in this next section, we're going to look at the historical data that was later used to cross-reference the evidence the cadets brought forward.
The big break in the case came when William Lang, who was now living all the way in Australia, reached out to a researcher named Andrew Mackenzie. Lang's memory of the event was so detailed, so crystal clear, that Mackenzie was able to treat this not as some ghost story, but as a set of historical clues that could actually be investigated.
And Mackenzie's research, wow, it uncovered this startling historical match. Records confirmed that construction on the Kersey Church Tower was in fact stopped in 1348 when the Black Death hit, which perfectly matches the cadets' observation of a half-built church. And the very building they said was a butcher shop, it started operating as one right around 1350. All this data led Mackenzie to believe the cadets hadn't seen the plague itself, but the village decades later, maybe around 1420, A community just shattered by that trauma.
And this is where the case just becomes mind-blowing. Let's cross-reference. The half-built church tower, it matches the historical record. The butcher shop, confirmed by property records from the 14th century. The rotting oxen, totally consistent with the mass slaughter of animals during the chaos of the plague. Even that terrifying feeling of being watched, it fits perfectly with the idea of a traumatized, isolated community that would be deeply suspicious of any outsiders.
So, this all brings us to the final section of our file, the case hypothesis. When you take the witness testimony and you lay it next to the historical data, what is the most plausible, if, completely unconventional, explanation for the Kersey incident? The theory that seems to fit all the evidence best isn't really time travel, but this phenomenon called place memory. The idea is that really powerful traumatic events can literally get imprinted onto a physical location, like they're burned into the landscape itself. And under just the right conditions, that memory can be re-experienced by people who happen to be there.
So this leads us to the final hypothesis in the report. The cadets didn't physically travel through time. Instead, they walked directly into a living, breathing memory of the past. They experienced an echo of Kersey as it existed centuries ago, a moment of collective trauma so intense that its energy was somehow still resonating in 1957.
And this is a chilling but really important distinction. The presence the cadets felt watching them from those dark windows, it wasn't the ghosts of plague victims. According to this theory, it was the memory of the living. The traumatized survivors from the 15th century looking out at three strangers who had just wandered into their world. They basically made eye contact across a 600-year gap.
The file on the Kersey incident is still technically open, and it leaves us with this final, really unsettling question. The cadets ran from that village, and who could blame them? But their experience suggests that sometimes the past isn't really past at all. It's just waiting for someone to walk back inside it. What happens then? That's what this case file forces us to ask.